At the height of its power, the nation believed itself unbreakable. Its borders were secure. Its treasury was full. Its armies were feared. Its ruler was praised in public and obeyed in private. To the outside world, this was a state that had survived wars, rebellions, and generations of enemies. But history rarely ends with invasion. More often, it ends with a whisper. In candlelit chambers, behind sealed doors, and beneath public oaths of loyalty, decisions were being made that would undo centuries of power, not by foreign armies, not by popular revolt, but by betrayal from within. This is not a story of sudden collapse. It is a story of slow corrosion, a story where ambition outweighed loyalty, where fear silenced truth, where survival replaced principle. By the time the nation fell, the decisive blow had already been delivered, quietly, deliberately, and by those closest to power. This is the story of that betrayal, and how it brought down a nation. The nation did not begin weak. It emerged from struggle hardened, unified, and confident. Its institutions were respected. Its ruler governed through a careful balance of reward and punishment. Elites prospered. The military remained loyal. The population believed in continuity. Yet power, when concentrated too long, creates illusion. Advisors stopped challenging decisions. Officials learned that survival depended on agreement, not competence. Loyalty became performative. Truth became dangerous. The ruler began to hear only what reinforced authority. Meanwhile, beneath the polished surface, rival factions formed, not around ideology, but access. Access to the ruler, access to resources, access to succession. The state still functioned, but it no longer listened. And that was the first crack. Every powerful state relies on an inner circle. Generals, ministers, confidants, men and women whose proximity to power grants influence beyond law. In this nation, the inner circle was small, insular, and deeply competitive. Publicly, they spoke of unity. Privately, they maneuvered relentlessly. Each feared exclusion more than national decline. Each believed betrayal was safer than trust. Files were hidden. Orders were delayed. Intelligence was selectively filtered. The ruler was shielded from uncomfortable realities, not out of loyalty, but calculation. Slowly, the inner circle stopped serving the state. They began serving themselves. And once that line was crossed, collapse became inevitable. Betrayal is rarely dramatic at first. It begins with silence, a military report not delivered, a warning dismissed, a rebellion underestimated. When border provinces began to destabilize, officials downplayed the threat. When economic signals turned negative, data was adjusted. When allies expressed concern, reassurances replaced reform. Some acted out of fear, others out of ambition. A faction within the inner circle recognized an opportunity. The weakening ruler could be replaced. The crisis could be accelerated. And when the moment came, loyalty could be exchanged for survival. Plans were not written. They were implied. And in that ambiguity, betrayal flourished. Every collapse has a moment when disaster could still be avoided. For this nation, it arrived quietly. The ruler demanded clarity. Reports conflicted. Advisors hesitated. The truth hovered in the room, unspoken. Those who spoke honestly risked exile, or worse. Those who lied gained time. The decision was made to delay action. That delay proved fatal. Rebellions consolidated. Foreign rivals recalculated. Confidence evaporated. And the inner circle, sensing the end, prepared for personal escape rather than national defense. In that moment, the nation was not defeated. It was abandoned. To the population, life appeared normal. Ceremonies continued. Announcements reassured. Symbols of stability remained intact. But states do not collapse when people panic. They collapse when elites defect. The military fractured along personal loyalties. Governors acted independently. Taxes stopped flowing upward. Orders lost authority. The betrayal had moved from whispers to action. And still, the ruler believed loyalty remained. History would remember this not as ignorance, but isolation. When the end came, it came without heroism. No last stand. No unified defense. No rallying cry. The ruler was removed, not by revolution, but by procedure. Arrested by guards who had sworn loyalty days earlier. The inner circle dispersed, each claiming innocence. Foreign powers moved in cautiously, finding a state already hollow. The nation fell not with fire, but with paperwork. And the betrayal was complete. The fall of the capital did not end the story. It merely removed the illusion of unity. Without a central authority, the nation fractured along the lines that Betrayal had already drawn. Provincial leaders asserted autonomy, claiming they acted in the name of stability. Military commanders secured territory not for the state, but for leverage. Administrators stopped enforcing laws that no longer protected them. The bureaucracy, once the backbone of governance, became paralyzed. Decisions required authority. Authority required legitimacy. And legitimacy had vanished with the ruler. What followed was not chaos, but competition. Each faction believed it could inherit the state. Each underestimated how much had already been destroyed. Borders hardened into front lines. Former allies treated each other as threats. The population, once shielded from elite maneuvering, now bore its consequences. The betrayal had ended the nation. Fragmentation ensured it would not return. Betrayal rarely rewards everyone. Some of those who engineered the collapse escaped quickly. They secured foreign protection, assets abroad, and rewritten narratives. In exile, they portrayed themselves as reluctant participants, forced by circumstance, compelled by necessity. Others were less fortunate. Rival factions accused one another of treason. Former allies became liabilities. The same logic that justified betrayal now justified purges. Documents surfaced. Conversations were leaked. Old loyalties became evidence of guilt. Many who believed they had acted pragmatically discovered that betrayal does not end with success. It demands repetition. Trust, once broken, is never restored. The most ruthless survived. The cautious were discarded. The loyal were already gone. History would later debate who truly betrayed the nation. But among the betrayers themselves, judgment was swift and unforgiving. Collapse invites hindsight. Analysts would later identify moments when reform could have altered the course of events. Power could have been decentralized. Institutions strengthened. Transparency enforced. Succession clarified. But these solutions required something rare in entrenched power systems: self-restraint. The ruling elite benefited too greatly from ambiguity. The inner circle thrived on access without accountability. Reform threatened privilege more than collapse did. Warnings were present. Historical precedents were known. Comparable states had fallen the same way, through elite defection, institutional decay, and moral exhaustion. What failed was not intelligence. It was courage. The betrayal succeeded because it faced no internal resistance. No shade commitment to the state outweighed individual survival. In that environment, collapse was not an accident. It was the logical outcome. This nation was not unique. Across centuries and continents, the same pattern appears with unsettling consistency. States do not fall when enemies attack. They fall when insiders disengage. When elites stop believing the system deserves loyalty. When institutions serve power instead of principle. When fear replaces duty. Empires crumble. Republics dissolve. Kingdoms fragment. The names change. The languages differ. The mechanics remain the same. Betrayal is not an event. It is a process. And once normalized, it becomes unstoppable. The ruins of the nation still stand, not always in stone, sometimes in borders drawn differently, sometimes in archives sealed, sometimes in collective memory deliberately reshaped. The official story speaks of inevitability, of unstoppable forces, of external pressures. But beneath those explanations lies a simpler truth. The nation was not defeated. It was abandoned. History does not punish states for weakness. It punishes them for disloyalty to themselves. And as long as power is concentrated without accountability, as long as loyalty is rewarded over truth, as long as betrayal is framed as pragmatism, the story will repeat, quietly, predictably, and always from within. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic stood unmatched. Its armies had subdued Carthage, Greece, Gaul, and much of the Mediterranean. Its laws shaped citizenship. Its institutions, senate, magistracies, assemblies, were admired even by its enemies. Romans believed their state was immortal because it was shared. No king ruled Rome. Power was divided. Authority was temporary. Loyalty was owed not to men, but to the republic itself. But success altered incentives. Conquest brought wealth, and wealth brought inequality. Generals returned from campaigns richer than the state that sent them. Soldiers grew loyal to commanders who paid them, not to institutions that debated endlessly. Rome still called itself a republic, but its foundations were shifting. The Roman Senate was meant to preserve balance. Instead, it became defensive. As social pressure mounted, from landless veterans, indebted farmers, and expanding populations, the Senate resisted reform, not out of ignorance, but fear. Reform threatened aristocratic privilege. When the Gracchi brothers proposed land redistribution, they were not defeated politically. They were killed. That moment marked a turning point. Political violence entered the Republic not from the masses, but from its elite. The Senate chose survival over legitimacy, order over justice. The Republic did not fall that day, but it crossed a line it would never uncross. Rome's greatest strength became its greatest weakness. Its generals. Marius professionalized the army, offering land and pay to volunteers. Loyalty shifted subtly but decisively from Senate to commander. Sulla marched on Rome itself, something previously unthinkable. He justified it as necessity, as restoration, as temporary. Every justification was a betrayal. Each precedent made the next easier. The Republic still existed on parchment, but power now followed legions. Julius Caesar did not destroy the Republic alone. He exploited what betrayal had already hollowed out. The Senate, fearing his popularity, demanded he surrender command. They offered no compromise, no reform, only humiliation. Caesar crossed the Rubicon not as a revolutionary, but as a product of elite failure. Many senators supported him quietly. Others fled. Some hedged their loyalty, waiting to see who would win. The Republic had no defenders left. When Caesar was later assassinated, the conspirators claimed they were saving the Republic, but it was already gone. Their betrayal came too late, and only accelerated the end. Augustus did not abolish Rome's institutions. He preserved them. That was the final irony. The Senate continued. Elections continued. Laws continued. But all real power resided with one man. Romans accepted this because they were exhausted. Civil war had taught them a lesson. Betrayal was worse than submission. The Republic died not because it was conquered, but because its elites no longer believed in it enough to sacrifice for it. Rome's fall from republic to empire was not inevitable. It was engineered, not by the poor, not by foreigners, but by those entrusted to protect it. The pattern repeats because it is human. When elites prioritize survival over stewardship, states decay from the inside. When betrayal is rationalized as pragmatism, collapse becomes policy. History does not ask whether power was seized. It asks why it was surrendered. Nations are not destroyed in a single day. They are unmade decision by decision, by those who believe the state will survive without their loyalty. It never does. For more than 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire survived what few states could. It bridged continents. It governed religions. It absorbed cultures without erasing them. From the walls of Constantinople to the deserts of Arabia, the empire adapted through flexibility, pragmatism, and institutional discipline. Sultans ruled, but governance relied on administrators, jurists, and soldiers bound to the state rather than bloodlines. For centuries, This system worked. But endurance bred complacency. By the 18th century, the empire still appeared vast on maps, yet fragile beneath its surface. Military defeats accumulated. Economic power shifted westward. Administrative corruption spread quietly. The Ottomans did not face immediate destruction. They faced something more dangerous, a choice between reform and preservation of privilege. The Janissaries were once the empire's greatest innovation, a professional standing army loyal only to the Sultan and the state. Recruited young, trained rigorously, forbidden from private wealth or inheritance. Their loyalty was institutional. Over time, that loyalty eroded. Janissaries married. They opened businesses. They formed families and factions. Military discipline gave way to political influence. Reform threatened them. When sultans attempted modernization, new drills, new weapons, new chains of command, the Janissaries resisted violently. They deposed rulers. They assassinated reformers. They framed stagnation as tradition. The army sworn to protect the empire became its strongest opponent. This was not rebellion from below. It was betrayal from within the state's core. Ottoman decline was not caused by ignorance. It was caused by fear. Courtiers, officials, and provincial elites understood the need for reform. European states were advancing technologically and administratively. Diplomats warned Istanbul repeatedly. But reform threatened entrenched networks. New schools meant old positions vanished. Merit-based promotion endangered hereditary privilege. Centralization reduced local autonomy. So reforms were delayed, diluted, or sabotaged. Sultans who pushed too hard faced removal. Those who hesitated survived, but at the cost of momentum. Each compromised reform strengthened conservative resistance. Each delay widened the gap between the empire and its rivals. The state knew what it needed to survive. Its elites chose comfort instead. In the 19th century, reform finally arrived. The Tanzimat era promised equality before the law, centralized taxation, modern bureaucracy, and secular courts. On paper, it was revolutionary. In practice, it was fragile. Elites publicly endorsed reform while privately undermining it. Laws were passed without enforcement. New institutions existed alongside old power structures. Reform became performance. European powers applauded progress while preparing petition. Provincial leaders exploited ambiguity. Religious authorities questioned legitimacy. Military reform lagged behind political declarations. The empire appeared to modernize, but its foundation remained divided. The First World War did not destroy the Ottoman Empire. It exposed it. Alliances were chosen by desperate elites seeking survival rather than strategy. Command structures collapsed under mistrust. Ethnic and regional tensions erupted as central authority weakened. Some officials cooperated with occupying forces. Others pursued nationalist agendas. Loyalty to the empire dissolved into loyalty to factions. When defeat came, there was no unified defense of the state. The empire ended not with a single betrayal, but with thousands of small ones accumulated over decades. The Ottoman Empire fell not because reform failed. It fell because reform was never fully defended. Those entrusted to modernize the state protected themselves instead. Those sworn to serve institutions sabotaged them when threatened. Betrayal did not come as treason. It came as obstruction. History remembers the Ottomans as slow to change. The truth is more unsettling. They tried, and were betrayed by their own guardians. Rome betrayed its republic. The Ottomans betrayed reform. The pattern narrows. Next comes a state where loyalty was enforced absolutely, and belief vanished entirely. The Soviet Union was not born fragile. It emerged from revolution hardened by civil war, ideological discipline, and centralized power. Unlike older empires, it did not rely on tradition or monarchy. It relied on belief. The party was the state. The state was the future. Every institution, from the military to education, was designed to enforce unity of purpose. Loyalty was rewarded. Dissent was punished. Ambiguity was eliminated. For decades, this system produced stability through fear and conformity. But fear cannot substitute belief forever. As generations passed, ideology hardened into ritual. Slogans were repeated without conviction. Loyalty was performed publicly and abandoned privately. The Soviet state still demanded obedience. It no longer inspired faith. Power in the Soviet Union did not reside only in leaders. It resided in bureaucracy. Ministries controlled production. Committees controlled information. Party officials controlled careers. Advancement depended not on innovation, but on conformity. Over time, truth became dangerous. Factories met quotas on paper, not in reality. Agricultural reports hid shortages. Economic failures were reclassified as successes. Everyone knew the system was malfunctioning. No one dared say it openly. The bureaucracy learned to survive the system rather than serve it. Loyalty became a survival tactic. Initiative became a liability. The state continued to function, but only as a performance. By the late 20th century, belief had evaporated at the top. Senior officials no longer expected the system to endure. They prepared quietly for alternatives. Foreign bank accounts were opened. Children were educated abroad. Private networks replaced public ideology. Publicly, they defended socialism. Privately, they planned for its end. This was not conspiracy. It was resignation. The elite did not plot to overthrow the Soviet Union. They simply stopped protecting it. When faced with reform or defense, they chose disengagement. The state still existed, but its guardians no longer believed it deserved saving. When reform finally came, it arrived too late and too exposed. Glasnost open speech. Perestroika restructured the economy. Both required something the Soviet Union no longer possessed: institutional trust. As censorship weakened, suppressed truths flooded public discourse. Historical crimes were acknowledged. Economic inefficiencies were revealed. National grievances resurfaced. Reform demanded cooperation. Instead, it revealed fragmentation. Officials obstructed changes that threatened them. Regional leaders asserted autonomy. Security services hesitated. The military refused political responsibility. Reform became acceleration. The system unraveled faster than anyone intended. When the final crisis arrived, it was anticlimactic. No massive uprising. No decisive battle. No final purge. A coup failed, not because it was resisted, but because it lacked belief. Officials waited. Commanders hesitated. Citizens observed. The Soviet Union ended not in fire, but in paperwork. Signatures replaced gunfire. Flags were lowered quietly. Institutions dissolved themselves. The state collapsed because no one stood to defend it. Not the people. Not the elite. Not the guardians of power. Loyalty had existed without belief. And belief, once gone, never returns. The Soviet collapse shocked the world because it appeared sudden. In reality, it had been underway for decades. The betrayal was not dramatic. It was passive. Those entrusted with power chose withdrawal over confrontation. They allowed the state to dissolve because defending it demanded conviction they no longer possessed. This was betrayal without villains, and that made it more dangerous. Transition, the pattern complete. Rome fell when elites abandoned the Republic. The Ottomans fell when reform was betrayed. The Soviet Union fell when belief vanished. Different systems, different centuries, same outcome. History offers no mystery here. States collapse when loyalty becomes conditional. When institutions exist without defenders. When elites prepare for life after the state instead of fighting for its survival. Betrayal does not always wear the face of treason. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes like delay. Sometimes like pragmatic exit. But the result is always the same. The nation falls not because it was attacked, but because it was no longer believed in by those closest to power. Every nation believes its collapse will be different. History insists otherwise. The end does not come from outside. It comes quietly, from within. In the modern era, collapse no longer announces itself. There are no invading armies crossing borders, no palaces stormed, no flags burned in public squares. The modern state collapses while functioning. Elections continue. Markets open. Government buildings remain staffed. Officials give speeches about resilience and growth. Stability is constantly declared. And yet, beneath the surface, something essential begins to withdraw. Commitment. The institutions still exist, but belief in them weakens quietly. The state appears strong until the moment it is tested. Modern elites do not flee on horseback. They diversify. Assets move offshore. Residences multiply. Children acquire foreign citizenship. Influence becomes transnational. Publicly, elites speak the language of patriotism. Privately, they prepare for disengagement. The state becomes a platform, not a project. This is not illegal. It is not conspiratorial. It is rational behavior inside a system where loyalty is no longer reciprocal. The elite no longer ask how to preserve the state. They ask how to survive its failure. At that moment, betrayal has already occurred. Modern institutions rarely collapse outright. They hollow out. Courts issue rulings that are selectively enforced. Legislatures debate without consequence. Regulatory bodies exist but hesitate. Laws apply unevenly. The appearance of order masks the absence of authority. Officials learn which rules matter and which do not. Enforcement becomes discretionary. Corruption no longer shocks, it integrates. The state becomes predictable not through law, but through networks. Citizens adapt. Trust erodes. Compliance becomes transactional. The nation still exists, but its authority is conditional. Every hollowed state eventually faces a test. An economic shock, a contested election, a security failure, a sudden loss of legitimacy. The response determines survival. But this is where modern betrayal reveals itself. Elites wait. Institutions hesitate. Security forces seek legal cover. Officials demand guarantees. Everyone calculates risk. No one commits. And in that hesitation, the crisis escalates beyond control. The modern state does not always fall. Sometimes, it simply stops working. Public services decay. Regional authorities assert independence. Parallel systems emerge. Foreign influence fills gaps. Violence becomes localized and normalized. The capital remains intact. The nation does not. International observers debate definitions. Citizens adjust expectations downward. History marks the transition quietly. This is collapse without spectacle, and it is made possible by betrayal without confession. Across empires, ideologies, and centuries, the pattern does not change. Rome fell when elites chose power over republic. The Ottomans fell when reform threatened privilege. The Soviets fell when belief vanished. Modern states weaken when loyalty becomes optional. Betrayal is not always active. Often, it is passive withdrawal at moments that demand sacrifice. The state asks for defense. The elite ask for insurance. History records the result. Every nation believes its institutions will endure automatically. They do not. Institutions survive only when defended by those who benefit from them, even when defense carries personal cost. When elites disengage. When loyalty is conditional. When survival replaces stewardship. The nation does not fall immediately. It erodes. And by the time collapse is visible, betrayal has already done its work. The greatest threat to any nation is not invasion. It is not protest. It is not economic hardship. It is the quiet decision by those closest to power to stop believing the state is worth defending. History has never forgiven that choice, and it never will. Some nations are born through revolution. Others are born through withdrawal. When colonial powers departed, they left behind flags, constitutions, and borders, but not cohesion. The new states inherited institutions designed for control, not legitimacy. Authority had been imposed, not negotiated. Independence arrived with ceremony. Power arrived without trust. Elites stepped into offices built to extract obedience, not consent. The state existed, but its meaning was unclear. Was it a shade project, or a prize to be captured? The answer would shape everything that followed. The first generation of leadership spoke the language of liberation, unity, development, sovereignty. But beneath the rhetoric, power consolidated rapidly. Opposition was framed as sabotage. Institutions were personalized. Loyalty was demanded, not earned. The state became indistinguishable from its rulers. What followed was not immediate tyranny, but selective inclusion. Access to power meant access to resources. Exclusion meant marginalization. The betrayal was subtle. The nation had not yet failed, but it had stopped belonging to everyone. Courts existed, but their independence was conditional. Parliaments debated, but outcomes were predetermined. Security forces protected order, not law. Institutions survived, but as instruments. Elites learned how to manipulate procedure without abolishing it. Elections legitimized authority without threatening it. Laws punished enemies while shielding allies. This was not chaos. It was controlled erosion. Citizens adjusted expectations. Participation declined. Trust retreated into ethnic, regional, or personal networks. The state remained visible. Its credibility did not. As legitimacy weakened internally, survival shifted outward. Foreign aid replaced domestic accountability. International approval mattered more than local consent. Security partnerships substituted for national cohesion. Elites learned that the state did not need citizens to survive, only recognition. The social contract thinned. When crises emerged, leaders appealed abroad before addressing their own population. Policy responded to donors faster than voters. The betrayal was complete when elites stopped seeing citizens as the foundation of the state. Post-colonial states rarely collapse once. They decline in cycles. A coup replaces a corrupt regime, then repeats its methods. Reform movements capture power, then guard it jealously. Constitutions are rewritten, then hollowed out. Each cycle erodes belief further. By the time violence returns, it is no longer shocking. By the time authority fractures, it feels familiar. The nation still exists, but its future no longer feels collective. Post-colonial betrayal is not born of malice. It is born of inheritance. Elites inherit states without legitimacy, institutions without trust, borders without identity. In that vacuum, survival logic replaces stewardship. Power becomes defensive. Reform becomes risky. Loyalty becomes transactional. Betrayal persists not because leaders are uniquely flawed, but because the state was never fully claimed by its people. Across history, the mechanism remains unchanged. States fall when elites detach from the fate of the nation, when institutions serve power instead of principle, when survival eclipses responsibility. The names differ. The centuries change. The outcome repeats. The betrayal that brings down a nation is rarely dramatic. It is quiet, incremental, and always justified. History does not demand perfection from nations. It demands commitment. States survive hardship. They endure defeat. They recover from error. What they cannot survive is abandonment by those entrusted to lead. Every generation faces the same choice: to treat the state as an asset or as a responsibility. When the latter disappears, collapse is only a matter of time. The betrayal that brings down a nation is never announced. It happens the moment those closest to power decide the state is no longer worth their loyalty, and from that moment on, the ending is already written.